Hey, I'm Dr. Wilson. I'm a PhD molecular biologist, and welcome to another COVID debunking video. So I've been getting a lot of requests to cover a video that John Campbell recently made about mRNA vaccines causing cancer, because of course he thinks that now. Of course he is wrong, and there is no evidence that mRNA vaccines cause cancer. And you might say, but Dr. Wilson, John Campbell just uses a pen and underlines things in papers. He was just reading a paper on screen, and the paper said that mRNA vaccines cause cancer. No, it did not show that. So let's just jump into it. So John Campbell is reading from this paper, Increased Age-Adjusted Cancer Mortality After the Third mRNA Lipid Nanoparticle Vaccine Dose During the COVID-19 Pandemic in Japan. Let me skip all the criticisms I can make about the journal it was published in and just go straight to what the data say. Literally all this paper is doing is saying that there's a correlation between COVID vaccine doses and cancer deaths. That's it. It's just a correlation that they point out. As a scientist reading a paper like this, knowing the claim that John Campbell is making based off of it, I would at least expect to see an analysis of vaccinated versus unvaccinated patients and what the rates of cancer deaths were in those two groups. That's not here. I would also expect to see them rule out other possibilities, because again, they're just pointing out a correlation here, and they're only looking at a correlation between vaccination and cancer deaths. But what else was going on at this time? I wonder. The authors point out that most of these cancer deaths are occurring in 2022, and they also say that 2022 is around the time that a third dose of COVID mRNA vaccine was being rolled out to the Japanese population. But what else was happening in 2022 in Japan? Oh, right. They recorded record numbers of COVID cases and COVID deaths, thanks to the very quickly spreading Omicron variant that occurred around that time. So do these scientists make any attempt to correlate COVID cases and deaths with these cancer deaths? No. Do they try to assess how changes in routine medical visits might have affected these cancer patients under the circumstances of the pandemic, like we know it did in other countries? No, they don't. They simply make a correlation and then reference a bunch of garbage literature that I've addressed on this channel already, claiming that mRNA vaccines are contributing to cancer, when the literature does not suggest that at all. Cancer is a disease that happens over time as more and more mutations accumulate in your cells. Over time, when these mutations accumulate, they gradually break down the processes that your cells use to control their growth and work together to make your body work the way it does. With these mechanisms that help your cells work together and keep the peace, so to speak, break down, then you get cancer, uncontrolled cell growth. There are environmental factors that can affect cancer risk, and we call those carcinogens. These can work a number of ways. They can either directly affect your DNA and cause damage to it, thus increasing your risk of mutations, or they can cause chronic inflammation or chronic damage, causing cells to need to replicate more often, and thus with each round of replication, you get more risk of mistakes happening, and those mistakes are in the form of mutations. And mRNA vaccines are not carcinogens in any sense of the word. mRNA is something your cells make all day, every day to express the information in your genes and make them into functional units called proteins. It's not going to damage your cells. And the protein made from the mRNA vaccines, the spike protein, is going to be quickly destroyed and attacked by your immune system. That's the whole point. And if you're going to say that the spike protein is somehow contributing to cancer, then you're also going to have to accept a reality that SARS-CoV-2, the virus itself, is going to increase your risk of cancer as well. And I don't think anti-vaxxers are going to go for that idea. And it's also an idea that is not supported by evidence. There's no evidence that SARS-CoV-2 increases your risk of cancer. Again, cancer is going to happen when enough of these mistakes or damages build up over time. Thus, cancer is a disease generally of the elderly. Most people who get cancer are old because they've been around long enough to accumulate a bunch of mutations. Japan is also one of the oldest nations in the world, and age happens to also be a huge risk factor when it comes to COVID. So when COVID enters a very elderly population, we would absolutely expect it to have a big impact on the elderly population, and those people are also more likely to have cancer. So that's most likely what you're seeing here, but these authors don't investigate that at all. They clearly have a bias, they go straight for that bias, and they don't try to remove any bias at all, which is what science is all about. Remove your bias, ask questions objectively, and go with what the data says. They're not doing that here. And neither is John Campbell. Christopher Hitchens once said that what can be asserted without evidence can also be dismissed without evidence. And this paper didn't present any evidence, so it can be dismissed without evidence. But I'm not going to do that. I'm going to present evidence. In addition to everything I just said, pointing us to the conclusion that this paper is just wrong and horribly biased, we can also look at other countries. If mRNA vaccines are increasing the risk of cancer mortality, we should see that in other countries, not just Japan. There's nothing magical about Japan that should make them overly susceptible to some magical mRNA vaccine effect. And when we look at other countries, we see that cancer mortality incidence, age-adjusted, has not gone up. Even in the most highly vaccinated countries in the world, these increases in cancer deaths are not seen. If this is your first time to this channel and you're asking, how did John Campbell get this so wrong? This is what he does. He knows that he can get millions of views on his videos by talking about vaccines in a negative light. That's how his channel has grown exponentially since the pandemic started. So don't just watch an old man underlining things on a camera and think that he's right. Actually read the paper yourself, ask the relevant questions, and see if those questions are actually addressed and answered by the authors of whatever paper you're reading. And in this case, not only are those questions not investigated or addressed at all by the authors, but the extant literature easily addresses it and shows that what these authors are suggesting and what John Campbell is suggesting is garbage. And that's it. That's the story here. It's just a correlation that doesn't check out when you actually dig into it. That's going to do it for this week's video. Thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And as always, all the links to all the science that I talk about in this video are linked in the description below, so you can read them for yourself and not just watch John Campbell underline them. And if you enjoyed this video, then go ahead and give it a like and subscribe so you can catch me next week where I'll be debunking some more funky stuff. See you then.